For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, another episode coming your way, and we got a good one lined up for you. Jako Lucas hops on the podcast today. Jako is a certified badass, in my book at least. He's a traveler, an adventurer, an explorer. He is an international fly fishing guide. He's guided in some of the most remote and sought-after destinations in the world, such as the Seychelles, Mongolia, Siberia. He is guided in Norway. He's guided in Africa in many spots, Tanzania, Zambia. He is from South Africa, and he's just an awesome guy. He's a Yeti Ambassador. He is a cinematographer. He has his own production company called Capt Productions, where they make films, takes photos. You can find him on Instagram at Captain Jack Productions. He's a popular social media aspect of the fly fishing industry, but on the podcast we share stories and all kinds of adventures from his time traveling the world. We do mention fishing a lot, as he's a fishing guide, and I want to mention one thing he mentions, GT. If you're not familiar with that, it's a fish. Jeet, he also refers to them as, if you hear him saying that, basically it's just a giant, massive alpha predator fish that is sought after game fish that people like to target. So he mentions Jeets and GTs often, just don't want to leave you hanging there. And without further ado, here is international traveler, adventurer, explorer, and angler, Jako Lucas. All right, Jako, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast, man. Excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. Well, looking forward to chat some outdoorsy, fishy adventures and all sorts of crazy stuff. Definitely been on some crazy stuff, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you give us just a little bit of a breakdown of your life as a fly fishing guide, as a traveler, adventurer, and just give us kind of the resume sheet overview of who Jako Lucas is and what you do.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I'll try and keep it in a nutshell and short as possible. But basically, born and raised in a great Afrikaans family in South Africa, and my dad introduced me to fishing from age 4. From actually probably before that, because I've got photos where I'm a little baby lying in between his reels while he's fishing in the surf in South Africa. So it's kind of an inevitable situation where that love was going to happen pretty easily, and then. Yeah, I just kind of progressed from there. Like I said, grew up in South Africa, played all the South African sports, rugby, cricket, all that kind of stuff. And but fishing was also always kind of the main thing and the passion from the get-go. And I very randomly, I was my first year in university, and I met a guy called Keith Rosinas, and I spoke to him. He just actually finished the season in Russia guiding, and I met him on a beach that I actually just randomly went to in East London in South Africa, and saw him wearing a fishing shirt, and we kind of got talking, and he told me about this career with him guiding in fly fishing, and I immediately very interested and wanted to know a little bit more about that, being able to build a career in fly fishing. And then I kind of just took it immediately. Listened to every word he said, because I just followed the whole process and finished my degree. And then I went to London to work in a fly fishing shop exactly like he did, got some experience in that, and then guided a little bit around South Africa, and phoned him up and just said to him, look, do you have a guiding job for me available? A year later, and he literally, I flew back to South Africa for an interview and went back to London to go pack my stuff. He's like, 2 weeks later, I'm heading to Cosmolita in the Seychelles, and that was kind of it. Then from there onwards, just guiding the craziest places. I started off mainly the heavy stuff and crazy adventures in the Seychelles, but then just kind of kept on going from there. Still stuff in Africa for tiger fish in Zambia, and then went to Mongolia, and then Norway and Russia, and then just kind of traveled expedition travels in Bolivia and Brazil and Australia and all sorts of stuff. So the further and the crazier it is, the more I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. I'm very fortunate. I've been very lucky, but I work really hard at it too, as crazy as it may seem, but it's easy because I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you can't have success and be able to do those types of places and those types of things without having a burning passion and the wherewithal to act on that passion, right?
For sure. And then, like I said, I mean, it was always a continuous, just a fun thing for me to do, because I've been fortunate also to make a couple of movies and stuff within the fly fishing industry that's done pretty well, and that just kind of come from enjoying the guiding, and then I wanted to start capturing these moments, which were things that only happen. I mean, I always tell guys that moment that you are in the outdoors, especially with animals or with fish or something like that, the catching those different fish, whichever fish it may be that you continuously catch, that moment only happens once. So let's say I catch a GT, that I might catch 5,000 GTs, but every moment will be different. And that's why I started wanting to capture it and just show it to different people and create some dreams. And, the fly fishing industry is a really small industry. Fishing is massive, but fly fishing is still pretty small, but it was key for me to start introducing younger people into the sport. And I could do that through video. So now we've got hopefully younger guys that kind of think what we do is cool and get into the same industry that we are in.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've definitely watched a handful of your films or more. I always keep up on what's going down with Captain Jack Productions, and you put out awesome stuff, man. I'm definitely a big fan of it, and it's a lot of it is the same type of stuff that I'm interested in, and I think that listeners of the Buffalo Roamer podcast are too. Is just going off to somewhere, oftentimes unknown, and trying to piece it together and figuring out how to do it. I think that's the big thing that people always ask in terms of knocking off a big item, right? Whether a big trip, a big expedition, whatever it is. It's like the first step is just taking that first step and then trying to figure it out along the way,
Definitely. And you know what the funny thing is now just getting off the water again and guiding clients, and that's even here on Texas pretty easy, accessible and stuff. But what I mentioned to the clients is when I'm on the water guiding or fishing or exploring something, when we in that situation, even hunting, you are so in tune with that situation and nature and stuff that literally only after you kind of done, you realize what's going on in the outside world. Like, I mean, we both know how crazy the world is at the moment with all the stuff going on. Like on Friday, the whole day, all we could think about was catching redfish and jacks and nothing else. Only once we were done with all of that, we got back and like, oh, look at the stuff that's going on. So it's just that escape that I think is good for the soul, and it sounds kind of cliche, but it definitely something that is very necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I share that as like a deep seed in my soul, and I think it's cool what you're doing with films and just the way that that you've attacked living a way that you find fulfilling. But take me back to your first adventure, which maybe was the Seychelles. Maybe you had one before that. The first time that you kind of left off into uncharted territories, and you were like, "Whoa, I'm a long way from home. Things are different, and this is freaking sweet."
Yeah, I mean, the first and best fond memory, and that will always stay the most special place in the world to me, was to go to Cosmolito. I mean, I went with the South African crew of guides that are super hardcore and that knew what they were doing. And at that stage, I was a super rookie. I mean, I was just out of university. I worked in a shop. You work in a shop, you learn a lot of things, and you think you know it all, but you get thrown in a place where you're sitting on a liverboard boat in the middle of nowhere, nobody else around, and I mean, I still remember exactly the number of GTs. That first week I guided in Cosmolito, I wasn't really trained at that stage. We just weren't enough guides to be trained. So I think I was shadowing maybe for like a day or two, and then I immediately started guiding clients. But I mean, we landed 373 GTs in a week with clients, which is just, I mean, that's scary numbers. And we didn't even count the offshore GTs. That's just pure flats, sidecasted GTs. And it was frightening. Like, I mean, the intimidating thing to me is I also never forget it. I was like day 3 guiding, and I remember one of the clients after the first session, we got back from lunch, and he was super unhappy, and he called me and the head guide Arno in, and he literally just absolutely let loose on me, and he said, I'll never make it in guiding. He wasn't here to catch 20 GTs a session. Like at that stage, we were catching even more than that. I mean, 20 GTs in one session is just insane. And like, I mean, I didn't even know what to say. I was like, I felt pretty good about what we did and what we accomplished. And yeah, but I mean, I love when I get a hard time. It just makes me more motivated and do stuff a little bit harder. So hopefully that guy is out there somewhere. And I've seen, I don't even know how much, I think between Keith and I and some of the other guys, we've landed thousands and thousands of GTs. So it's just, I mean, yeah, and that's just kind of key.
Yeah.
That place is super wild. I mean,
so yeah, take me through. Take me through for folks who don't know, who aren't familiar with even the fishing world. Take me through what are the Seychelles, where are they, and just give me like an overview, kind of a layman's overview of what the Seychelles are and why they're such a special place to fly fishermen specifically.
So basically, the Seychelles is a chain of islands that's sort of a bit more north of Madagascar. It's off the East African coastline, and it's just, I mean, you get the main island, which is Mahe, and I believe that it's got a French influence. I don't know if it's owned by the French, but it's a country on its own. And then you've got all these chains of islands. You've got the Aldabra group of islands, and you've got the Farquhar group of islands. Farquhar Islands is obviously the one where you were. Providence is part of that chain. So, I mean, it's really just a very far removed chain of islands that funnily enough, it was never really, I mean, there were a few groups of people that went to go look for the next sort of bone fishing, because it's such a popular thing is to fish for bonefish. A long time ago, there were guys that were looking for the next bone fishing destination, and they happened to get past Cosmolido. And the funny thing is, those guys only went with bonefish rods catching bonefish, and they didn't even know what they had. But I mean, once you're in Cosmolido, the closest, how can I say, I think the closest access to sort of more civilization that you have would be a 2-hour, 45-minute chartered flight back to Mahe Island. And then you're still on a small island. And then it's another, let's say, 5 hours to South Africa, or then you fly another 7 hours to Dubai. Or it's basically a 2-day travel if you're from the US, as you know. It's a long, it kicks your butt, that travel.
It does.
For sure. And then you've got the time differences. But again, once you're there, it's all yours. It's just like yourself. And I have been lucky. I mean, I've been guiding there so long, but every time now I fish another place, I realize how special is it, because those places are untapped, really well managed. Nobody else fishes it. There's only a select group of clients that go there every season, and it's just really well managed. So it's phenomenal fishing. It's as good as fly fishing can get.
And how about like your first time visiting the Seychelles? And I want to dive into all of your, as much as we can into some of the different adventures and different places. But starting with the Seychelles, your first time in the Seychelles, what was it that struck you, fishing included, or even just the whole experience? What was it that struck you about the Seychelles when you were there? You step off the plane, you're thousands of miles from anywhere.
Yeah, basically just the once you arrive at Cosmolido, just the rawness of it. Just it's just and very seldom in the world that we live in now that you get a place that you really, I mean, not even, you can look at a place on Google Earth and you can see those places, but to step your foot on those places, you realize like how special it is. And again, it's taken me time, because I mean, I started like my hardcore guiding career there, and I wouldn't say you take it for granted because you're blown away every day by it. But I mean, now the more time I spend guiding, I just realize like just unique and again far removed and raw those places are. And I mean, there's quite a lot of people that have fished there now, and it's I wouldn't say it's a commercial fishery. I mean, unfortunately, it's a pretty expensive place to go fishing at. But I mean, the people that manage it do a really good job of trying to keep it as pristine as it previously was. I mean, the Alphonse guys that run most of the islands now, they're just doing a fantastic job just to keep that sense of rawness. Unfortunately, just to add on to the story about the whole the Seychelles thing is most of the islands now, we don't do the liverboard ships anymore because we had the whole big thing that happened with the pirates, which you may know. In 2009, I was on a boat with 2 other guides, and we were on a boat with 10 American clients, and we had just got off the mothership, the Indian Ocean Explorer, with the group of clients. We climbed onto the chartered flight to fly back to Mai, the main island. And as we were still in transit to Mai, the mothership, the Indian Ocean Explorer, got taken by pirates with the whole crew and the captain and everybody. And they were kept in Somalia for 88 days. They got half the ransom. So they set the crew free eventually after, I mean, those guys went through a lot, and then they sank the boat. And that kind of obviously put a little bit of a stop to all our operations out there, but we were able to operate off of land. That protects us a lot more against the piracy stuff. The piracy stuff is gone. It doesn't happen anymore. It's not an issue. But now the liverboard thing doesn't really happen that much, unless Providence, they still fish a liverboard, but that's also going to become a lodge. But people still need to understand that the lodge is not going to take away the rawness of it. It's just for a safety aspect, and it's made it a little bit more comfortable for people, but you're still fishing a place that is fantastically pristine.
Yeah, that must have been quite the experience. I mean, quite the emotional roller coaster. What I don't want to rip open any Band-Aids or anything, but what do you remember from that experience?
It was that particular week, we already had rumors of the piracy stuff happening. So we definitely always kept an eye on the horizon, and we saw a lot of lights and every now and then, which most of the time it was either sea cucumber vessels, or they were the odd commercial fishing vessels that were on the outside. On the outside. So the funny thing is the thing I would never ever in my life forget is the morning before we left, we were driving with Patrick, the tender driver, and we were coming around the corner. We just fished Assumption, the island that we were flying to Mai from. And National Geographic had a boat next to our boat, the Indian Ocean Explorer. Now, look, the Indian Ocean Explorer we always referred to as the animal bum, because it was basically a working fishing vessel that was just good enough to get us back and forth. The crew was absolutely phenomenal. Probably one of the best crews that I've ever worked with, just super hardcore. Captain Francis is one of the best captains I've ever worked with. But I said to the guys, my clients, I said to them, who would want to take our boat if they could take the National Geographic boat? And that's the same day that it got taken.
Jeez.
So, we were still in a situation where we were still comfortably safe. I don't think we ever felt that we were in harm, especially the fact that we got to Mai. The rest of our crew that were guiding on another island on Providence, they didn't hear from us for a while, and they assumed we got taken. So there was a lot of miscommunication. But, I mean, we ended up being safe, and the clients ended up being safe, which is a blessing. But I still feel for it. I mean, if you read, there's a book called 88 Days. If you read that book, and that's just a fraction of the stuff that crew went through. Mentally and physically, they were just, the fact that they made it out of there alive was very... That's kind of when it sets into me, like the stuff that we could have gone through, which we were so lucky with.
Yeah, that's wild. That's wild. Like I said, I want to jump around to all kinds of your stuff, but I mean, the Seychelles are just such a fascinating place, and it seems like they're having a bit of a moment here in the past, few years, just in terms of the fly fishing industry, kind of. Yeah, showing off the grandeurs of the Seychelles. But what do you have any like nature moments that stick out where you're like, holy shit, I am in a wild place. This animal just did that, or something along those lines?
Look, I mean, the one thing that'll probably still also stick with me forever. This happened just after the whole piracy thing, when we could start guiding Farquhar again. we went in early season to go start prepping the boats like we usually do for the clients. We actually had a group of South African clients, which we've guided a lot of the times. They agreed to come with us while we were prepping the boats. We try to get 2 boats ready, get them out, and then we'll just get all the other boats ready and slowly on the water. But they kind of knew the deal. We were still setting up camp. But it was nice to have them so we could just prospect the flats a little bit. It started off with a complete nightmare. All the boats were broken. It was just like we literally did not sleep. I mean, we didn't sleep for 48 hours, which we tried to fix the boats. We got some spare boats on. We guided clients. We came back, worked on boats. Anyway, that was just the one scenario in the background, which is something that seems to happen very often. Like you just kind of fix as you go. But we went out guiding. We actually got the clients out the first day. I went to an island called Depot Zay, which you probably have seen, and Warren, Daisel, and Keith Rosinas went with 2 clients to Goulet Island. And we came back at the end of the day, and something crazy happened. We couldn't figure out initially. Warren and Keith walked, and there were these explosions behind Goulet Island, which turned out to be GTs. They saw the GTs feed on something, these massive explosions, but they couldn't really see what was going on. And then what happened is Keith went to the front of the island with the guests to try and see if there's some jeets in the front. Warren went back to go and check something on the boat. As he went back, he literally saw a GT go full breach and eat a bird out of the sky. Like, I mean, he just completely whaled that bird. Sorry, I just have this.
Yeah, that's
sorry.
Right.
Are we good?
Good to go.
The GT basically just came out. He went to the front and told the guys that he just had a GT full breach come out and eat a bird. They all thought that he was completely crazy and smoking something. So they came back, told us about it. I went out the next morning with a group of clients, obviously immediately with all that excitement. Went there and the first thing, we kind of saw a lot of birds around, obviously like you do the whole thing. We saw 2 GTs coming down the line. I told my client to get ready. He tried to make a cast, but he unfortunately by accident hooked one of the boobies and one of the turns, and it dropped into the water. And the first GT just raced up and whaled the bird completely, swallowed it whole, and started running off. And then immediately, like, we ended up landing that GT. It was like a meter GT, and immediately we knew this is what they were doing. And then slowly we took our time, and this is kind of where BBC managed to get that crazy footage, because I made a little short video called Gangsters with a Flat, and one of my clients liked it. He spoke to these people from BBC, and the whole connection made, and they phoned me up, and we started talking about what this whole phenomenon was happening. The GTs were eating the birds. So what it ended up, the story was, is just the baby terns were learning to fly. And what would happen is, obviously they're still getting used to it, and they would just fly a little bit lower. And these GTs learned through time, this is happening. And we were landing GTs and you could feel it sounds gross, but you got birds like in its stomach.
Insane.
So it just kind of shows you how crazy nature was. To be honest with you, like, we would fish for those GTs, and eventually, like, after a week or 2, you could see those things educated too. They were double checking those, or the flies that we were casting, because they know these things are hurting them now. So they were getting a little bit more selective. But if it's a real bird, you saw the BB. You must have seen the BBC thing. It is one of the greatest things in nature that I have ever seen. I had a GT at one stage. We were just drifting from the boat. That full breach, maybe it must have been 5 feet out of the water after a bird. And he was probably, 10 feet away from us. He almost jumped around the front of the boat to eat a bird. It's nuts. It's crazy.
That is insane. Yeah. And, excuse me. Yeah, I have seen I've both seen Gangsters of the Flats and as well as the BBC, what is it, Blue Water?
The Blue Planet.
Blue Planet. Yeah, Blue Planet clip, which if anybody's interested in kind of seeing that story that Jaco's just sharing, go check out Blue Planet GTs eating birds. It'll pop right up. Yeah, and it's pretty amazing. So how about I'm curious about a lot of other locations, but you mentioned Russia, which I'm kind of jumping around in the timeline, but that's one to me that has always been really interesting. I was actually just talking with Matt, who's a mutual friend of ours. We were talking about some of the Siberian rivers, the three great northern rivers of Siberia. What's your Russia travel experience?
So I mean, Russia is definitely still also a very special place. It's definitely also very unique in its own right. But so I was fortunate enough to guide on the Atlantic Salmon Reserve and also work on one of the lodges there. My wife was actually also, it was awesome. She went with me and we kind of managed the lodge too, and hosted there. That's Atlantic salmon fishing and sort of pristine rivers fishing for these amazing giant Atlantic salmon. You kind of got that, which is considered sort of a gentlemanly like way of fly fishing. And then you got the other spectrum and these crazy rivers in Russia that you find gigantic taimen, the biggest salmonoid in the world. I was fortunate enough to also be able to go on an exploratory trip in Russia a few years back, and we fished 10 different rivers. The initial trip, we were looking for a Nelma. It's a Russian she-fish. They call it an Eskimo tarpon too, which is a very unique fish. It's actually family of the whitefish, but it's a lot more of a predatory fish. But we still also looked for big taimen, and I mean that's one of the greatest adventures also again of my life. Just how far. I mean, on that trip we picked up a woolly mammoth tusk that was laying straight up on the bank, not buried or anything. It just shows you that how many humans have gone past there. It was just open and for everybody to see. So I mean that was pretty wild. But then, I mean, these were very rivers on the Lena, tributaries of the Lena River. But the next place that I'm going to really, whenever we can travel again, is called the Tugur River in Siberia, which is genetically where the biggest taimen live. I mean, these things are feeding on salmon. A friend of mine, Ilya Shubovich, recently caught 3 world records. He got I think he got a 120 pounder on fly. He got a 100 pounder. It got crazy. Just to see. It's very difficult. I wish I could just show everybody exactly to see live how big even a 60-pound taimen is. If you hold that thing, to see a trout that's that big is scary. It's very unique. It's and that's just again one of those adventures and places that's very, very wild.
What does the process for you look like? Because to me, is one of the most fascinating parts is that exploratory angle of what you do, but just of fishing in general. What does a process look like in terms of you're sitting down and it's like, okay, we want to find a new destination to either take people or just to check out yourself. But what does that exploratory process look like in terms of finding new spots?
So, I mean, Google Earth has definitely made that a lot easier. Now we can kind of find spots on Google Earth that seems that it hasn't been accessed, but you still never know until you arrive there exactly the situation. I mean, it's still hard to say, but so, I mean, there is a lot of research that goes into an exploratory trip way before that. I mean, the preparation on what gear to take, because now, usually when you go on these exploratory trips, it's pretty wild and there's no established lodges. So you have to be ready for every scenario. And usually, I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that goes wrong. I mean, social media, unfortunately, any sort of media that people see, usually most of the time they see all the good stuff. But I promise you that there's a lot of stuff that goes wrong and stuff that breaks and stuff that doesn't go according to plan. But I mean, research is the key thing. And like certain things, we're lucky now that we've got quite a few people that we know in the industry. We've got people that can put their ear on the ground or find out, like Ilya would, for example, be able to find some form of communication with some of the people in Siberia. And you kind of look for knowledge. When we were looking for the Russian she-fish, for the Nelma, we were kind of just cruising around and finding these local fishing villages or fishing places where they're catching locally. And then you kind of ask those locals for information. But, you know, funny thing is usually it's so skewed. It's like, it's very drips and drabs. Like the guys told us, yes, they're here, but they already left this time, but you can find them up this way. And then like everything is contradictory to itself. So it kind of gets confusing. And then I mean, at that stage, you just have to sort of use your knowledge as a fisherman to find just good looking water. You need to know the species you're targeting. So what kind of habitat that he'll like? Would he like to sit in the lie? Would you like to sit in fast water? Does he eat? What does he eat? So then you just kind of research and hopefully it all comes together. But I mean, there's a lot of fails for all the successes. So it's not always a success.
Sure, absolutely, but that's why you have to go, and that's why somebody hasn't gone before, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can get to a river and it could be blown out that exact time that you go there for this exploratory, but it could potentially be really good, but it's just not good that time. So seasons and all sorts of stuff. It's a lot of factors, but that's what makes it nice, because when you make it happen, it's just so much more rewarding.
Have there been any places that you've been on an exploratory trip that have come to fruition as a fishing destination?
I mean, we definitely were lucky to do most of the pioneer work in the Seychelles, and now it's just gone very, very. I mean, I wouldn't say, like I said, commercial. Unfortunately, there's only a select. It's still a bit pricey to go there. I feel bad that, I mean, but that's just the logistical cost to basically get there and to run an operation out there. But that was kind of like the flagship one that's I've probably been involved with the most. I mean, there's a few sort of tiger fisheries. There's friends of mine busy putting together. They've been working really hard. I mean, I'm talking about a decade worth of work to be able to potentially target a Goliath tigerfish on fly. There's a friend of mine that's been doing another decade's worth of work on catching giant tarpon on fly in west coast of Africa. And it's a weird thing when we talk about the tarpon, and I mentioned to people we're catching them in Africa, those two don't connect. They can't connect the dots. But when they see the size, I mean, I'm talking like 250 to 300 pound gigantic tarpon. There's quite good numbers. I mean, it's still very, very untapped resource in Africa for tarpon. I mean, it's not the classic Florida flats where you got crystal clear water, but that friend of mine, Arno, that's doing those trips there, and the guys from African Waters, I mean, they catching laid up 250 pound tarpon on a fly rod. So that's just silly. And another place that I've been fortunate. Sorry, I'm also just jumping around just from excitement.
Good. Yeah, absolutely.
On this. I could say probably one of the best adventures that I've been on. I mean, it's definitely top 5 was to Cameroon, on the Faro River with African Waters, catching giant Nile perch on fly. And I mean, these guys have landed them up to 162 pounds on a fly rod.
That's insane.
In a river and I mean, you've got hippos snorting and going crazy sort of next to you. You've got crocodiles everywhere. It's epic. It's epic. It's as good as it gets. But those guys have been able to now assess, because usually you have to do quite a few trips before you can go, okay, look, we can sell this to people to go to. But then you also have to take into account how many people can we handle, how many people this river can handle, because you still want it to be as pristine as possible. So then you have to limit the number of anglers that can go there, which again, then for operational point of view, that pushes the price up a little bit. So it's a tough thing. I know a lot of these guys want everybody to go fish those locations, but their hands are kind of tied down on what they can do with regards to the price on getting people there.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel personally, you know, I've been with the videos and the places that I've been called a trust fund baby many, many times. And look, I've got a family that looks after that's been fantastic. A mom and dad and a sister and my wife, and everybody has been very supportive on everything I've done, but we've done everything from nothing. So every place that people say, like, I've been fishing the Seychelles a lot. I mean, I spent 4 years, my first time guiding the Seychelles, before I picked up a fly rod in the Seychelles. So I was guiding people into fish that I didn't even have a clue on how to really fish for them. I was just using the knowledge base I had. But that's how I got to see these places, and that's why I'm also doing the movies. It's more to create a dream. Honestly, if I can do it, anybody can. Super cliche, but I promise you, if I can do it, anybody can.
Yeah, absolutely. And that going back to that Cameroon trip, that is one also similar to Russia for me. Tigerfish or Nile perch, and just like the thought of going on a backcountry trip in Africa, I've never been to Africa other than flying over to the Seychelles, and that just sounds wild to me. I imagine like you said, big river, hippos, like wildlife everywhere, like loud rushing water, and just being like in that feeling of being in the middle of nowhere, which is one of the things that I love.
Exactly, and you know what the funny thing is people kind of always, when I mention these trips, especially the Africa trips, to people, they immediately have that sense of danger. And I promise you, I'm still here, I'm still alive, I'm still kicking, and it's the guys won't run operations there if it's not safe enough. The exploratory initial set out that they go do, that the guys do, is that could potentially be a little bit dangerous. But I mean, most of the times, so the guys that you're spending time with on the water there that's guiding you are guys that are used to the bush. Like I've always said, the guys from African waters, they are some of the most hardcore guides on this planet. Those guys have collectively had malaria more than the whole planet put together. You can't believe, like I was fishing Cameroon next to Stuart Harley and Greg Gowie and a guy called Keith Clover, and Greg had picked up malaria, and he was sitting there sweating, but he was still with us. And I said, "Oh, look, you don't look good." And he said he'd rather be sweating that malaria out next to the river than sitting in the camp. And I mean, the dude's guiding with malaria.
Gnarly.
Many people fear getting malaria. These boys are working while they have malaria, but they do have some stuff that help for it. But again, that's unique situations. The clients are very, very safe. You do take precaution on the malaria stuff. Again, in and out, it's easy. It's a long travel as any of those places, but you got to have to be willing to travel. The world now is just a place where you have to go the extra mile to go and get that.
What is the bush of, say, Tanzania or Zambia? And I don't know how different or similar those two places are. But what does the backcountry of Africa look like, and how is travel done, and what is traveling in the bush in Africa like?
So, I mean, I think every single trip I've done in Africa always, so it involves a chartered flight from some town that's I mean, it's still Africa, it's still a third world country. So, but again, I mean, really nice, people are happy, but it involves a chartered flight, and then it always involves a drive with a Land Cruiser through amazing bush veld. Like, I mean, you've got buffaloes around. The one of the most amazing animals that I have not seen, that I saw for the first time in Cameroon, was a Lord Derby eland, which is the biggest antelope in the world. I mean, this thing, I mean, it weighs up, it tops out at like 900 kilogram. I mean, that's 2,000 pounds. And
Holy
I mean, it was
cow.
standing. I couldn't like fathom how big this thing was when I saw it the first time. And there was 5 running past us, and then again, you kind of immediately going on those kind of trips to Africa immediately makes you understand how as humans, if those animals decided to beat the hell out of us, we've got no chance. I mean, you're actually just a little speck on this planet. We get very arrogant as humans, and to think that we know it all and invincible.
Going back to that, I don't know why I just thought of this now, but I think I wrote it down when you said it. But your woolly mammoth tusk that you found in Russia, did anything end up happening with that, or did it lay sitting in the same spot?
So so what happened is we camped on one spot, and it was weird. The one guy, he's from Slovenia, that was on this trip. Everybody that was on that crew had an experience of salmonoids in some way, and we kind of put all our knowledge together to figure this place out. He went to go to the bathroom, and he literally stumbled across that thing. That was the funniest thing to me. When he walked closer with it, we all went like, "Man, that must have taken you some time to get out of you." But I mean, it was also so massive and heavy. It was so well preserved in the ice. But what ended up happening is the guys took it back, and it's actually they were first wanted to get it in the museum in Russia, but then I think they ended up putting it up in you could see it in the Panoy River camp. They took it to Ilya's camps. Rock actually gave it as a gift to Ilya so they can keep it there. So it's still a lot of people get to see it, which is nice. And yeah, so it's cool. It's on display there. Very cool.
Awesome. So I lived when I was living in Montana. In 2017 or I think it was 2017. I canoed the Yukon River, which is the longest river of Alaska, third longest river in North America. So we did a 70-day canoe trip all across Canada and Alaska. And on this trip, I ran into a couple of guys who were doing the same trip, and just happenstance ran into them. It was like a cold, rainy day on the river. We pulled off to try and find some shelter, and I saw some campfire smoke coming up ahead. So we pull off the river and walk up, and sure as shit, we see 4 guys doing the exact same trip as we were, Yukon River source to sea. We hadn't seen, non-native folk or Native Alaskans for the whole trip, and then we randomly see these guys and walk up, and they are from Montana, the same town that we were from. And I was actually looking for a roommate at that time. I was when I got back, my lease was up, and I needed a place to live. And one of the guys around the campfire was like, "Yeah, I'm looking for a roommate as well." So we ended up getting off the river and living together in Bozeman, Montana. But in that house, we had a massive woolly mammoth molar. It took 2 hands to hold. Yeah, it was about this big, and my friend Brett, who I had met on the river, found it in Alaska on the Yukon, and it was sticking out of halfway sticking out of some melted permafrost.
Yeah.
And so they grabbed it. Awesome. Yeah, grabbed it. They managed to get it all the way back. I think they took it to the paleontology department at Montana State and asked, just kind of verify it and see what it was. And they verified it was a woolly mammoth molar. And they kind of asked like, hey, is this okay to have? How does this all work? And they had said, yeah, it's kind of a gray area about having it. And then they asked about the value, which I thought was funny. And the person at the paleontology department said, well, a lot of people use them as doorstops.
Oh, okay.
I was like, I thought it would have more value than that, but
that's not the answer you were looking for sure.
Right, but it's awesome, man. And I couldn't believe how heavy it is, and on the inside of it, you can see on the inside of the jaw, and you can see all the bone marrow. It's like really finely threaded, just bone marrow. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and again, that just shows you, just the size and just looking at that stuff, how really insignificant we are compared to any of that stuff. For me to if I find personally anything around a trip on the US and I find anything cool like that, it'll be difficult for me to give it to a museum and not keep it. So that's really awesome. Yeah, what a small world. It's crazy how things work out.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It really is. So what else are you looking forward to here? You said you got your Russia trip coming up, or hopefully.
Yeah, so basically that I can't see it happening. Most of my trips, so I've just basically been focusing on my Texas guiding at the moment. But I still have 3 trips pending this year. One to Mongolia, host a group out there, and then a back-to-back trip in Brazil. And then there was another one to Gabon, Africa for those big tarpon. But there's a lot of variables at the moment with international travel, so I'm not really bargaining on any of that. So I'm kind of just keeping all those trips pending for next year. Another location that I have to say for anybody that's an adventurer or love fly fishing, Australia is definitely also still. We did that movie, A Glorious Bastards, and that's also, if you talk about any trip that stands out, fishing, Australia is still for me one of the last saltwater frontiers and untapped resources in this world, and they do look after their fisheries really well. And that's another trip that I just can't wait to get back. There's a few other sort of pending trip. I want to go catch wolffish in Suriname, and what is there still? I mean, the bucket list is a lot deeper still than what I imagine. I've been managed to tick a few boxes, but there's still a hell of a lot. Goliath tiger fish in the Central African Republic. The list goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. How about the Suriname? What's the story with that adventure and that trip?
Well, I mean, Matt. So I heard of that a while back from a buddy called Paul Bork, that has another friend, a friend of a friend of a friend that's fished out there, and they did really well on the wolffish. It's a very unique look, and it's been very intriguing for me to. I really wanted to always catch one of those because they kind of look super prehistoric and just gnarly. The funny thing is Matt Podobinski went on a trip there last year, I think, and they did really well in Suriname on the wolffish. So we kind of just like playing around. It's not a full-on blooded exploratory trip. It'll be more for a first one for me. And just to get that done. But I still think that there's a lot of potential on fishing for those fish, and just sort of showing people more of the wolffish.
How about your time in Mongolia? We haven't really touched on that. What is Mongolia like? I not having been there, I image the image that pops up is the eagle hunters and big fur coats and a way of life that's still that's still rooted in that style of culture. Is that ridiculously far off? Is there still some of that? What's Mongolia like?
Well, the nomads on the out. So you get Ulaanbaatar, which is the main city, and actually more than half the population, I think 2/3 of the population, live in that small little main town. It's massive, but and then the rest of Mongolia still really. I mean, you still have the herds boys that's got their sheep and their goats and their horses and all that kind of stuff. So once you get out of that town, Mongolia still. I mean, once we're on the river. Honestly, it almost looks exactly like the Yellowstone in Montana just a few years back, and there's not a lot of stuff around. It's really, really still wild. The river looks very similar in the way that it runs and the braids and all that kind of stuff. But it's just the scenery is actually, funnily enough, pretty similar. But I honestly. Again, it was for me so I stopped guiding there a few seasons back because it overlaps with my Texas season. But it's honestly, it's hard for me to choose, but it's very, very special to me. The Mongolians have really caught up onto. We've got some fantastic Mongolian guides. The Mongolians are phenomenal when it comes to trying to get a message across looking after fisheries. It's very, very neat to see how the local communities there got involved with the fishery, which is just awesome. I mean, the last season I went several times. I was coming up the river, and there's not a lot of people that's got permits to fish the river that we guide on. But every now and then you'd see a Mongolian with a fly rod or a spey rod, which is just so cool to see. I mean, these guys have really started to get onto the fly fishing thing and single barbless hooks and catch and release and all that stuff. And honestly, I've seen first world countries that treat their fisheries worse than those guys. They are amazing, and the landscape's amazing, and they'll give you everything they can. Those people are always, they look after you, and just great people.
And we're talking, obviously you mentioned it's similar to the Yellowstone River in Montana, where big mountains, big wide landscapes.
Yep. I said it. Very, very similar looking landscape, but I mean, obviously you go the high mountains and stuff, you go further. I mean, you are where we fish or we guide at, it's about 60 kilometers away from the Siberian border. So we're pretty close. So you're really high up in the mountains and those river systems. And it's still amazing to think when you're fishing those rivers that you're fishing a river that's got a potential 60-inch taimen sitting there, and it potentially eats a dry fly, or it's a very rewarding fishery to guide on and to fish.
So I was reading just a couple of your profiles, I guess you could say, on different websites before we were talking here, and I came across one from Yeti, which you're a Yeti ambassador, about maybe a story about a Mongolian guide whose life was saved by a Yeti cooler, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, what happened is he was coming back at the end of the day. Usually, the guy that runs the bottom beat, he's got a long run back, and I mean, I wouldn't say you guide long hours, but it can be a pretty long day. I think he was just that moment where he was not focused as much, and he actually had a pretty old client on his boat too, and he just kind of, I don't know if he fell asleep or something, but he just took a wrong turn, slid off, and actually fell off the boat.
Oh, wow.
And for the most part, he was sitting on the cooler driving the tiller on the jet boat, and he fell off with the cooler. Luckily, went with him, and that was basically what he grabbed on because unfortunately he wasn't able to swim. So I mean, theoretically, now you've got a old client on the front with a boat spinning in donuts in front of you, and so it's a worst case scenario. But everything ended up working out okay. But it's kind of a serious but funny situation at the end. It's the client that ended up picking him up is a client called Paul Levens, which is like, I mean, this client of ours now is about, I mean, I want to say he is about 87, 88, and he fished Mongolia. And I mean, Mongolia is a fishery you got to be ready for. It's a hardcore fishery. You're casting all day, giant flies at fish, and potentially not catching one, or you'll catch a nice one. I mean, it's a like I said, a rewarding fishery. And he used to do 2 weeks with us in Mongolia, 2 weeks in Africa for the tiger fish, and several other trips. Just if all the guys that met him and that know him, he's just one of those guys that we like. If I'm that age and I can do what he does, then I've lived life.
Right.
So he's our kind of legend client, and he ended up saving a guy theoretically holding onto a cooler.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Well, Jako,
but it shows you. Sorry, the thing that I think a lot of people have to realize too is that you can. I mean, it sounds kind of, I wouldn't say super hardcore, but it's always good to be safe, because in these places, if something goes bad, if you break a leg or you get cut or everything goes bad, it is twice as bad as it happening in a place where you can go to a hospital, because most of these places you have to get evac. You are not going to get help for at least several hours until you get to somebody that can either stitch you up or straighten your leg or whatever it is. So a bad situation multiplies by 100 when you're out there.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how that works, and how it works with your mind too? Because you know that, and so you're turned on, and you're clued in, and you can feel that as you're out in it. But then it's funny. The other flip side of it is when you're in the front country or just back at home, it's like you just are so careless sometimes. You just do random stupid shit, get a cut, get something, and like you said, it's no big deal in the front country. But a scrape or a cut in the back country of Mongolia that gets infected, I'm sure is not a good place to be.
Yeah, and I mean, even guiding on those places in the Seychelles, we used to. It's like an African word, molas, which we always said were the guys at week 4 when you're guiding, you get these coral spores in your feet because the sand goes into your foot, and you've got gravel guards, and it scrapes, and eventually, because your foot's always wet, so eventually your foot. I mean, it doesn't sound, but it's gross, but your foot gets rotten, and you have to treat it with all these like drugs and stuff, and put a lot of like. Alcohol and stuff on it, and try and keep it dry and wet and dry and wet. So all that stuff just gets multiplied worse and worse. So I that's the other thing with guiding. I always have a lot of people asking me about guiding. You need, it's one of the most unsung hero kind of a job, but it's the world's most rewarding job. But you need to know you're in for something if you think it's going to be easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like any good adventure, right?
Oh yeah. And the thing is like, there's no, you learn how to fix problem in very different, we call it like bush fixing everything. You just find a way to fix something, because you can't necessarily, if your motor blows out or something happens, it's not like you can quickly get parts at the local shop. You gotta make do with what you have. And it's very interesting ways that we got to fix stuff.
Yeah.
And just do stuff.
Absolutely. Well, Jako, we're going to start winding her down here, but I got a few more, just a couple wrap-up questions for you. You got anything that you've been reading or any videos that you've been watching or any videos that you've been making that have been inspiring you to like get out and you know gets those butterflies going in your stomach like, that's cool.
So I mean, one that I'm definitely working on for the fly fishing film tour is the funny thing is I have always loved jacks because to me it's a giant trevally, it's a GT, but in the US they kind of consider trash fish. So the next project I'm working with on a really talented filmmaker called Shannon Vanderveer, he does some stuff for Red Bull and some super cool stuff, very talented, cold collaborative. And we're working on a jack movie just to show people that the Seychelles is awesome and you always have to keep that dream to go there, but there's no reason why you can't go and smash a couple of jacks and really get that same fix. And it's just very underrated fish. So we got some sick eats and stuff that I can't wait to show everybody. Also with the help of a guide called David Mangum, which is like the OG of tarpon guides. And we kind of just going to work on something cool for next year's film tour and just showcase something from the US. You know, I've done a lot of stuff at crazy places, but it's nice to show somebody crazy right next to their doorstep. So that's definitely something that's on the cards. But there's so many stuff that I get excited about that's pending, but it's so hard to see what's going to happen in the next couple of months or let alone tomorrow. So,
yeah.
But the jack one, I'm super excited about. Just it's going to be a fun project.
Awesome, man. Where can people find out more about you, more about Captain Jack Productions, more about what you do and who you are?
I try and, I mean, my website, captainjackproductions.com, there's a few stuff on and they can find some of the videos and stuff. And obviously social media, I try and keep that up. A little bit of a love-hate relationship with social media. It's a fantastic tool and it created so much good stuff for fly fishing, but it's a labor of love, as you may know. But they can find all sorts of info there, and I'm always open. If I'm around, you can email me on Jako at captainjackproductions.com. I'm always happy to answer or help with anything I possibly can. Sometimes it takes time when I'm out on the water. So if you shoot an email and it's not an immediate response, I'm probably out on the water or busy with a project. But I keep those emails in my inboxes or even messages on my Instagram or Facebook or I will get to it eventually. I never just delete stuff. And anything I can help with, always just nobody should ever hesitate. Myself and a buddy called Oliver White, which has done phenomenal stuff in the industry too. We are busy setting up a school for all ages to try and help guys build a future in the industry. So that's going to hopefully be coming next year. We've been working hard on it. So that's very exciting. And otherwise I'm just trying to work on cool stuff. I've got my Fly Religion clothing brand. There's some excellent, very, very exciting stuff coming with that, but it's a slow process. I'm in it for the long game, but so just, always hustling, trying to do something cool in the industry.
I love it, man. I absolutely love it. Well, really appreciate you giving me some time, and it was fun talking with you, man. And hopefully all this stuff settles down and we can get back to traveling and chasing big fish and all of that those adventures entail, right?
For sure. I'm looking forward to get out on the water with you. Definitely at some stage soon when this all, like you said, when it settles down. It's a weird world we're in now.
Absolutely. Let's make it happen. All right, Jako, appreciate it. Thanks so much for the time, man.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, there you have it. Jako Lucas on the Buffalo Roamer podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. We have tons of more great stuff coming your way. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram at Buffalo Roamer, website buffaloroamer.com, and please, I cannot stress this enough, if you can, leave us a 5-star rating and write a review for the Buffalo Roamer podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. It is going to get us so much farther and get us to so many more ears, and I would be greatly appreciative if you could give us a 5-star rating and write a review. One or the other, or if you do both, you're an absolute absolute rock star. All right, until next time on the Buffalo Roamer podcast, we'll talk to you soon.